WADR, promoting dialogue.
Good afternoon and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world on WADR.org. This is NEWSLINK. Here are the top stories. The Burkina Faso army neutralized dozens of terrorists and relocate displaced populations in the western region. Opposition political actors in Guinea reject government's plea as they forge ahead with September 5 demonstration. And the Nigerian Labour Congress threatens a total shutdown of the nation over the worsening economic situation of Nigerians.
To embark on a total and indefinite shutdown until steps are taken by the government to address the excruciating mass suffering and the impoverishment being experienced around the country.
Also coming up in the bulletin, 20 African heads of state and thousands of delegates expected in Kenya as the first African Climate Summit opens. Stay with us for details of these stories and more.
Here is Tawfiq Abdul Nasser with NEWSLINK.
Many thanks for joining us and a warm welcome to our listeners in the Gambia, Ghana and Liberia. Let's begin in Central Africa, where the coup leader in Gabon, Brice Nguema, has been sworn in as the country's interim president. General Nguema led last Wednesday's coup against Ali Bongo, toppling the president shortly after he was named winner of a disputed election. While thousands cheered on the street of the capital, Libreville, and elsewhere in support of the military, following the coup, the major political party, Alternance 2023, is asking for a swift constitutional rule. The Gabonese new strongman, General Nguema, is far from this reality, as the CTRI says is not in a rush to conduct elections. In the meantime, military leadership has reopened its air, land and sea borders, as well as held talks with the executives of the opposition party during the weekend to ease the standoff between them. And to some regional stories, thousands of people again gathered over the weekend in front of the French military base in Niamey, the Nigerian capital, to demand the departure of French soldiers. The gathering is one of many in recent days by supporters of the ruling CNSP since the coup on July 26 that ousted President Mohamed Bazoum. But unlike previous demonstrations that were held to protest against ECOWAS' imposition of sanctions and proposed military intervention, France's refusal to recall its ambassador despite his expulsion by the junta fueled Saturday's march. The demonstrators also called for the immediate evacuation of the 1,500 French troops who are stationed in the country to help fight against insurgency. A request Paris has failed to respect, saying the junta is not a legitimate government in Niamey. Now, the Burkina Faso army says hundreds of displaced persons have relocated to their villages and communes in the last 30 days following successful counter-offensive operations in the country. More than 65 insurgents were neutralized in different provinces during these operations and equipment seized by the armed forces. According to the chief of the armed forces, this success story was communicated on Sunday. Imoredet tells us more.
By September 1, 2023, which marked the end of the month-long counter-offensive operations by the army, dozens of terrorists who operate in the Orsi area were neutralized. In the Sahel, the army said it tracked and neutralized around 40 extremists who terrorized communities on the Gorom-Gorom-Makwe axis. The army, however, registered 5 deaths, including a police officer, and 4 vigilantes during the raids. Vehicles, weapons, ammunition, explosives, military uniforms, food, livestock, communication gadgets, and various materials were recovered by the 7th Rapid Intervention Battalion. Also, the troops seized a large quantity of drugs as well as important logistics. The Chief of General Staff of the Armed Forces lauded the success recorded, which according to him will weaken the armed terrorist groups in western Burkina Faso. Localities such as Ouagadougou, Konkala, Bolibana, and Diara Koroso, all located in the western part of the country, have been cleaned up with electricity and telephone networks restored, the army chief said. This development came days after the Burkinabe government announced two major military decisions, that is, the recruitment of over 1,200 recruits to join the fight against terrorism and the approved deployment of troops to Niger. The latter is yet to be implemented, according to sources.
Imoredete reporting there. In Guinea, the forces V are refusing to respond to the government spokesman's call for them to postpone the proposed demonstration due on September 5 and join the framework for dialogue. The socio-political actors insist that the demonstration will indeed take place in Greater Conakry to demand a rapid return to constitutional order and compliance with the transition timetable. They are also maintaining their demands to the transitional authorities that is the organization of a framework for a dialogue chaired by the regional bloc ECOWAS. James Japan has more in this report by our Conakry correspondent, Cherno Alpha Ibrahim Balde.
To deal with the threat, the transitional authorities are again opening a window of opportunity for discussion. Government spokesman Usman Gawal Jallo believes that the political class should abandon demonstrations and agree to dialogue. Rafiu So, president of the PRP party, said on Sunday that there was no question of abandoning the demonstrations on 5th September. For him, this government is no more credible. Another opposition political party, known as UFR, through a spokesperson for the Balde, reaffirmed that it will under no circumstances join the current dialogue framework, which it considers a sounding board for the transitional government. The former ruling RPG, Akensiel, is calling on the junta to take advantage of September 5th to return to the families the bodies of the soldiers killed that day 2 years ago at the Karamo Nabe Sekutureya Palace. At the same time, civil society actors are calling on the government to work for peace, respect for human rights, and the freedom to demonstrate.
James Japan with that report by Conakry correspondent Cherno Alpha Ibrahim Balde.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. NEWSLINK continues.
Nigerians have reacted to President Bola Tinubu's directive to recall all of Nigeria's ambassadors across the world. A presidential spokesperson on media and publicity, Ajuri Ngelale, said the directive takes immediate effect. The presidency maintained that the order is motivated by Tinubu's determination to ensure world-class efficiency and quality to citizens, residents, and prospective visitors henceforth at the embassies. Nigeria has 109 diplomatic missions worldwide, comprising 76 embassies, 22 high commissions, and 11 consulates. However, Nigeria's United Nations permanent representatives in New York and Geneva are exempted from the total recall due to the upcoming United Nations General Assembly later in the month. A NewsLink contributor, Adeni Kuno, joins from Abuja with his perspectives on President Tinubu's yet boldest move.
Of course, it came as a bolt out of the blue, as many people have actually described it, and some others have actually, thought it is. But the reality is there must have been reasons. And at the same time, these persons were appointed by the former president of the country. It is not possible for the current president to listen to the past president on the appointment of those that actually represented him in these respective countries. So I'm simply saying that perhaps those appointments or those ambassadorial representatives or the ambassadors themselves didn't quite reflect the ideology of what the current president believes they want. Don't forget that the mantra of the current president is renewed hope. So perhaps that is also going to have to reflect the renewed hope mantra of the current president. But I believe that that is important.
Adeni Kuno is an international relations expert. Meanwhile, the Nigeria Labour Congress is set to commence a two-day warning strike from Tuesday over the government's inability to meet its demand after the increase in the price of petrol and the hardship faced by the people. The union's president, Joe Wadr, says organized labor will embark on a total shutdown in 21 days if there are no responses from the government. Abuja correspondent Usman Umar reports.
Fuel subsidy removal and its attendant economic crisis have remained a talking point in Nigeria's polity. The policy has led to hardships among the people, and organized labor says it is determined to serve as the voice of the downtrodden. Joe Ajeru is NLC president.
To embark on a total and indefinite shutdown of the nation within 14 working days or 21 days from today until steps are taken by the government to address the excruciating mass suffering and the impoverishment being experienced around the country.
Inflation is on the high side as the umbrella body of workers believes the 133 million multidimensionally poor citizens initially recognized by the National Bureau of Statistics have increased. But the government says it is not leaving anything to chance to assuage the pains of the people. It believes the 5 billion naira intervention to each state as palliative for the people will go a long way to bring about the needed succor for the masses. The NLC had on Friday held a national symposium tagged Nigerian Economy and Crisis of Survival, Robbing the Poor to Pay the Rich. A human rights lawyer, Femi Falano, was the guest speaker.
It's no longer enough, sir, to go and ask for minimum wage. Even if they pay you 200,000 naira as minimum wage, it's meaningless now. And that is why we must ask questions about the dollarization of the economy.
It is worth noting that as NLC prepares for the two-day warning strike and the total shutdown of the economy in 21 days should the government fail to meet its demands, the federal government has already released 2 billion naira out of the 5 billion naira promised to all the 36 states. Some of the states have already commenced distribution of grains to their citizens. For NewsLink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Abuja.
Here in Senegal, the 129th edition of the Grand Magal of Touba is being celebrated under the theme, The Work of Senegalese Scholars in the Quran. Some 4 million pilgrims are converging on the religious city of Touba this Monday. The pilgrims who come from all over Senegal, Africa, and the rest of the world are commemorating the exile of the founder of Mouridism, Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba. In September 1895, Sergin Touba, as he is commonly known in Senegal, was deported to Gabon by the French colonial administration for 7 years. A few years after his return from exile, Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba recommended the Magal to his followers, a day of divine devotion, meditation, and the sharing of meals. One of the major innovations of this 129th edition of the Touba Magal is the rehabilitation of the Thiès-Touba railway line, which has been down since 2019. Trains were refurbished at the beginning of September to facilitate worshippers' transport and contribute to the economic development of Touba. Let's take you to Liberia as parents express frustration over their inability to register students for the new academic school year due to financial constraint. The 2023 to 2024 calendar for primary and secondary schools in the country officially opens today, September 4, 2023. The commencement of the new session comes amid the prevailing economic crisis faced by many Liberians, as well as the pending October 10 general elections. WADR's Darlington Popper in Monrovia has more details.
According to most of the parents, due to the financial difficulties they are faced with, they are unable to register their children. They term the lack of finance coupled with the upcoming elections, which has limited their purchasing powers, as constraints preventing them from having their children in schools.
Priority is the financial difficulty. Like one of the schools pay $350, $400 for our children to go to school. Second challenge is the educational materials is expensive in the country, and some are not available.
At the same time, schools administrations are having a fair share of the situation. According to Aninko, the register of God's Children's School, enrollment has been very low compared to previous school years.
Parents are complaining about money, complaining about fees. But for us, they don't have to complain because we stay the same. We have no other sin. Just they are trying though. It will not be 100%. They are trying. I don't know if at the time school opening time was too soon for parents. Yeah, maybe they need to push it.
Meanwhile, authorities of the Lakose College of Education along with the county's education officers have embarked on a massive verification of teachers' credentials. According to the president of the college, Benjamin Wai, the exercise is intended to weed out teachers with fake credentials and degrees from the classroom.
When a teacher falsifies a teaching certificate to gain access to the classroom, he or she becomes like a man carrying a driver license who has no training in driving. Imagine the number of lives he will be gambling if you were to place in his hand a bus, as in this case, the classroom.
It remains unclear whether or not the government will extend the registration period to have more students in schools. For NewsLink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I'm Darlington Pogba in Monrovia.
It's 16 minutes past the hour 12. You're listening to NewsLink on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM Dakar. Here is a reminder of our top stories. The Burkinabe Army neutralized dozens of terrorists and relocated displaced populations in the western region. Opposition political actors in Guinea reject government's plea as they forge ahead with September 5 demonstration. The Nigerian Labour Congress threatens a total shutdown of the nation over the worsening economic situation of Nigerians, and 20 African heads of state and thousands of delegates expected in Kenya as the first Africa Climate Summit opens. Still ahead is the press review, the guest interview, and sports update. Stay with us.
West Africa Democracy Radio. It's you speaking.
The government of Ghana has launched a cylinder recirculation model which aims to push towards the attainment of SDG 7, which works to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all. The policy is to ensure that by 2030, 50% of Ghanaians have access to safe, clean and environmentally friendly LPG, reducing deforestation, thereby promoting its extensive use in domestic, commercial and industrial sectors. From Accra, Atiwin Mbilolosin completes the story.
To ensure the seamless implementation of the module, all LPG refilling plants in Ghana will be assessed by the National Petroleum Authority (NPA) to classify them as either low or high risk based on their compliance with safety standards. Under the program, high-risk refilling stations will be promptly converted into filled cylinder retail and distribution outlets, while low-risk refilling stations will be exclusively designated for the supply of autogas with enhanced safety measures in place. The head of gas at the NPA, Obed Crane Boachi, says this new system will run concurrently with the existing module for the next 36 months to allow for the fine-tuning of the existing refilling stations.
You would continue to fill your cylinders at the refilling stations where you have always been filling until you see a cylinder exchange point pop up in your area, where you can go and then exchange a cylinder for a branded one.
However, the Executive Secretary of the Chamber for Petroleum Consumers, COPEC, Duncan Amoah, says this rollout will change little due to the bottlenecks in the system.
Well, it would interest you to note that we just had another session with the NPA. Is the issue of the Ghana card controversy. Truth is that the current LPG setup clearly would need the Ghana card to be able to access LPG beyond the rollout.
Reporting for NewsLink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I am Atiewin Imbila Lawson in Accra.
Elsewhere, Kenya will from today host more than 20 African heads of states and government and 20,000 delegates from around the world, including UN Chief Antonio Guterres, for the Premier Africa Climate Summit. Other stakeholders, such as climate experts, scientists, and academics, will meet during the two-day summit in Nairobi to highlight the continent's challenges in terms of climate change adaptation and mitigation measures and investment, including in forecasting and early warning system. Africa, with a population size of 1.3 billion people, hopes to put at the heart of every issues on the agenda concerns of energy to agriculture and the lack of data collection and funding that drives key decisions. Ogilvy Erica has more in this report.
According to a World Meteorological Organization (WMO) database, the African continent, larger than China, India, and the United States combined, has just 37 radar facilities for tracking weather. Europe has 345 radar facilities, while North America has 291. Kenya, the host of the climate summit, is one of the few countries in Africa seen as having a relatively well-developed weather service, along with South Africa and Morocco. Nairobi allocated about $12 million this year alone for its meteorological service, in contrast to the U.S. National Weather Service budget request, which was around $1.3 billion for 2023. The WMO said in 2019 that despite covering a fifth of the world's total land area, Africa has the least developed land-based observation network of all continents and one that is deteriorating. Fewer than 20% of sub-Saharan African countries provide reliable weather services, the report said. Last year, a collection of climate researchers known as World Weather Attribution expressed frustration in a study of erratic rainfall and hunger in West Africa's Sahel region, citing large uncertainties in data. In the meantime, African officials hope the meeting will strengthen the continent's voice and send a unified message ahead of the COP28 UN Climate Summit later this year.
Ogilvy Erica found that report.
This is the newspaper review. Stay on top of the news. Get the most important stories with added insight and concise review.
This is the newspaper review.
Here is Usman Umar in Abuja with the major headlines from the Nigerian dailies.
Hello and welcome to the press review segment. As usual, we have a couple of dailies today to take a look at. Now, let's start with the Guardian newspaper. The Guardian is leading with this banner headline: Cyber criminals exploit weak regulations to harvest data, defraud Nigerians. And then we move quickly to the New Telegraph, leading today with a story emanating from last week about a corruption case ongoing against the government of Muhammadu Buhari. And Buhari is responding to the former Attorney General of the Federation under the erstwhile PDP government led by Goodluck Jonathan. Buhari is responding here saying, "You are unfit to talk about corruption," Buhari tells Adoke. Adoke is the Attorney General of the Federation under the government that preceded Buhari's government, that is the government of PDP. We move to News Direct, leading with this story. Federal government targets 50% GDP contribution from solid minerals, with riders to review Mining Act, establish mines police. Before we wrap up, let's take a look at the Tribune. The Tribune is continuing with the corruption story against Muhammadu Buhari. And this day, Tribune is leading with this banner headline saying, "I was on a rescue mission," Buhari blasts Adoke over P&ID, Ajaokuta claims. We also have this Daily Independent. Daily Independent is leading with a business story saying, "Forex liquidity constraints to linger despite reserves boost." And you have some of the stories trending on the front page of the Daily Independent. Serap sues Tinubu over banning of 25 journalists from Aso Rock. Let's take a look at this story saying, Tinubu, 4 ministers jet out to India today for G20 summit. Of course, the G20 summit is holding in India, and President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is also attending, and he is attending alongside 4 other ministers. This is the much we have for you on today's edition of the Press Review. Do have a lovely day as we hand you over back to the studio.
That was Usman Umar in Abuja.
Politics,
Analysis on major news,
social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
This afternoon's guest interview takes us to Guinea, where the forces vive are steadfastly declining the government spokesman's plea to postpone the scheduled demonstration slated for September 5 and join the framework for dialogue. Instead, they remain resolute in their commitment to conveying the protest in Greater Conakry. They are demanding a swift return to constitutional normalcy and strict adherence to the transitional timeline. Joining us for this discussion is Adeni Kunu, an expert in regional security and governance.
I think that the incident taking place in the past recent one only last week appears to be unsettling everybody. Nobody wants a total state of anarchy, and that is why those who have decided to actually, have a protest are doing so that they will not be seen as complicit in the wave of irresponsible leadership. Even if we know that Guinea has a military rulership in place, everybody at this moment is beginning to have a rethink, and they want to get on the track of due process so that things just don't get out of hand. I know that there has been a process in place for the transition to take place as and when it's due. But you see, it could also mean that the people want to ensure that there is pressure to get to do the transition in good time and forestall any tendency of having those who have plans to sit tight there. So for Guinea, it's a way forward. And I also believe that the military will not want to be high-handed, bearing in mind that they also need some form of legitimacy, the fact that we're in the process, they're Greater Conakry. So the intended protest is in the eye of the world. And because it's in the eye of the world, everybody has to be very, very careful, bearing in mind that these are women particularly.
Right. So what do you think the outcome of this particular protest will be, especially looking at the history of protest in Guinea, now that the government is calling for dialogue and they are refusing?
I think that there are antecedents in Africa. I'd like to take you quickly to Mahatma Idris Deby's Chad Republic, where it is said transitional intent was left haywire, and they continue to allow Idris Deby stay in power up until the dastardly killings in that country. Now, Africans are aware of the tendency of power holders to not want to relinquish, be it military, be it civilian administration. And in this why, the people that are bent or bent on protesting know that the only way for the government now not to change the intended transition is to remind them that they are capable of unsettling the system that is, well, unarguably legitimate. So the police also should understand that they are mediators in civilian issues and should essentially provide.
Adeni Kunu is an international relations expert. Sankule Janko is here with Sports Update.
Hello out there, warm welcome and thank you for joining us. The Nigeria Football Federation NFF and coach Jose Peseiro have reached an agreement for the Portuguese to continue his role as head coach of the senior men national team of Nigeria Super Eagles, according to media reports. This comes after days of intense negotiations between the two parties. The NFF had initially parted ways with Peseiro after failing to renew his contract, which expired in June. It was reported that the NFF deemed Peseiro's wages too expensive. However, the Portuguese coach reportedly agreed a pay cut on his earlier terms. The agreement also put him in charge of the Super Eagles B team home-based players. As stipulated in the original contract drawn in May 2022, the Portuguese has been handed the mandate to lead the Super Eagles. And that's it for sports. It's back to you.
We have come to the end of this edition of NewsLink from West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Billy Munoz for the technical support. Do interact with us via social media platforms, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram at WADR News, on Facebook, West Africa Democracy Radio English Service. I'm Tawfiq Abdul Nasir. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening to NewsLink via Hot 104.3 FM, Newmi FM 94.0, and Veritas Radio 102.9 in Banjul, the Gambia. We also appreciate our listeners in Liberia via Alternative Youth Radio 98.9 FM, Lofa County. For you listening via Radio Pad 95.1 Damango, Savannah region, and on Royals FM 104.7 Wenchi, Ghana, we say a big thank you. Remember, West Africa Democracy Radio is all about you, your views, and your opinions.